So we're here to talk about the final principle, number 5 in this section on holism. Is the idea of synthesis and synthetic thinking. So synthesis means the combining of components or elements to form a connected whole. So it's the idea of putting things together rather than taking them apart, as opposed to analysis, which breaks things down. This is a mode of thinking that reasons upwards to see what emerges when we put the elements together. And it's saying that, sometimes when you put two things together, you get 1 + 1 and that equals 2. Sometimes you put them together and you get 1 + 1 and it seems to equal 3 or 4. One example of that, what we give later on, is about if we put two drugs together in a concoction, we get a synergy between them. And then something more powerful than them taken in isolation is actually realized. So there are many examples of synergies that lead to emergence, and that's why we need synthetic thinking to actually ask. It's not just when we break things down and understand those parts, but actually systems thinking is about understanding what happens when we put them together and what emerges. And that's why we need to think in a synthetic way to be systems thinkers, to bring things together and ask what happens there. So quickly look at that. It's reasoning upwards and looking outwards instead of reasoning downwards. A bicycle analysis would take it apart to understand the parts, describe it like that. Synthetic thinking would actually put it into its environment and say, what happens when it starts to interact with the cyclist, with the road, with the road transport rules and regulations, with the natural environment and the parking and so on and so forth, other modes of transport. And that's what we mean by synthetic thinking. Helps us understand the why. It's only when you really put things into context, they're performing their function, that you see why it exists, why it is the way it is as a whole. And that can lead to more transformative change, because then you can ask, if there's a different environment that needs a different function, different way of doing it, you can change the whole system, as opposed to analysis, which is really just going to ask about the parts and improve the parts and get to more incremental kind of efficiency improvements. So, of course, synthetic thinking, it leads into this idea of holism, because it's going to go upwards to help us understand the whole system. And this is one way of understanding it, the process. Russell Ackoff kind of outlined this. We want to first understand the broader. We start from the whole. And that's as we talked about, the concept of holism. So the first step in the process is to identify the whole system or the environment that the entity of interest is a part of. Then we talk about the function. We try to gain a broad outline of how this whole system functions through its network of connections. And lastly, we try to understand how the parts are interrelated and arranged to function within the entire system. And that's the process of synthesis, to help us understand the parts in relation to the whole as we put them together.